if you, at the very beginning of the meeting, we have a moment for public comment, and if you plan to make a public comment tonight, please fill out one of these forms and bring it up to, you can just hand it to Mary Ann. And we have, in just a moment, we'll have a time to do that, and I'll address that again. But if you wish to speak and haven't yet filled out a form, we welcome that. So thank you very much. To begin the meeting, we pledge to the flag. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
To begin, we'll take a look at the agenda, and I'll entertain a motion to approve if there's no changes.
I move to approve. Terrific job again.
Oh, this is just the agenda.
Oh, the agenda. Well,
But thank you.
Great job, Glenn.
I personally find that inspiring. Good results. We have good reports here that we need data from.
So we have a motion to approve the agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Merv? Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. And now to your compliments, Steve. We'll take a look at the minutes that Mary Ann does for us. It's such a good job that she does on the minutes.
We have two changes that I'm aware of, Glenn.
Okay?
One is that the next meeting will be March 3rd, not March 10th, so it needs to be noted at the end of the minutes. And then Mr. Crawford referenced the portables going into several of the schools in 1998, not 1988. So
Okay.
those need to be corrected.
And also, there's a statement here. Andy said OUSD is the lowest among our peers in the county on salary. I think he said second lowest in the county. Is that
To
right?
Moore Park.
For starting salary, Moore Park is lowest and we're second lowest.
Okay.
For starting.
So just that adjustment on page 3.
What's that adjustment again? I'm sorry.
Just to change the language, so the corrected language would be, Andy said OUSD is the second lowest among our peers in the county on a salary schedule.
Okay.
Well, I'll move approval of the minutes as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes with those 3 changes?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. So the minutes are approved. Next on the agenda, this is the time for public comment. And I appreciate everyone who's come, and especially those folks who are going to stand up and speak. We allow 3 minutes of comments. This is up until now, we've not had a lot of participation from the public in our meetings, and so there has been a little bit of back and forth. I'd like to tonight, because we do have a lot of things on our agenda, hold any sort of back and forth comments perhaps to the end of the meeting, if there's time at the end of the meeting to do that. So the 3 minutes is for us to receive your comments and not necessarily have a discussion about those comments at that particular moment. So I'd like to call up Hannah first, please. And can you also tell us how you say your last name as well?
Hassian.
Hassian, okay, great, thank you.
Should I stand here, sir?
Yes, please.
So hello, my name is Hannah Hassian, and I'm the 4-H Ventura County Ambassador. I also stand before you to represent my 4-H club, Chief Peak in Upper Ojai. I joined Chief Peak when I was 9 years old, and I will turn 18 in June. Many of our members join our club and usually stay in 4-H for 10 years or more. The amount of activities for children in the Upper Ojai area is limited, and 4-H truly fulfills that void. Our community is small and remote, and there are no other public buildings in Upper Ojai that could hold our group meetings every month. And did you know that Chief Peak has been meeting at Summit School for over 75 years? In fact, we currently have families who have been attending the monthly meetings for over 35 years. 4-H is agricultural based and focuses on teaching children ethics, responsibility, leadership, and the importance of community involvement. Our families work together to help the club and our community run efficiently. Without a place to meet, 4-H would probably not be able to continue in our area. Several of our members have parents that not only attended Summit School as students, but were past 4-H members growing up in our club. Please keep Summit School open, not just for the students, but for our community as well. Thank you for your
Well
time.
done, Hannah.
Thank you.
Do we have questions? I don't know.
Rick Loy?
My name is Richard Loy. I live in the Upper Ojai and have been a resident there since 1985. And I learned about the potential closure of the school just a few days ago, so I'm not up to speed on any of the underlying reasons. But I do know one thing, and it's clear. The Upper Ojai is a very unique place. It's unique when you drive through, it has a unique experience, and it has an iconic school. And by iconic school, I mean it's the little country schoolhouse. It's the school that when you see in the movies, you see it in Little House on the Prairie, that gives the iconic values of what we Americans are all about. And my sense is, I wish I was in your spot. You guys are in a good position. You're in a position to be able to preserve an icon. You can preserve that school when you drive by every day, or whenever you do, drive by to go to Santa Paula, you can go, I helped keep that country school. I helped keep the icon. Not too long ago, a group such as yourself probably faced a similar situation. And they saved the Little Red Schoolhouse on Highway 126 off of Santa Paula. They did that 50, 60 years ago. Thank goodness they did. You guys can do the same thing. Thanks.
Thank you. Rod Thompson?
Good evening. It's good to be in front of you today. I come as a long-term resident up there. My family's been up there since the 1800s, 1880s. We've attended schools up there since that time. And Summit School, my granddaughter's the fourth generation there. The school, as was well presented, the school is a community meeting place. It's where I, as president of our water company, where we have our meetings. It's where the search and rescue has their meetings. It's the only public location where we can meet. And it's kind of the hub where people get together in that valley. It's a challenge with the kids, with busing and such. Up there, it's a unique little valley, isolated in amongst itself. I know after 45 minutes riding a bus to Nordhoff, just how much a bus takes out of a kid. And I just want to encourage you that the 4-H, I met there at 4-H. My father met there at 4-H. And it is just an icon. It's something that we would really like to see preserved if at all possible. It is a very important part of our community. The education has traditionally been excellent, although with removal of teachers and such, there's been challenges that we've experienced recently. But I, again, want to encourage you to consider keeping Summit School. Thank you.
Thank you. Sherry Usher?
Hello, my name is Sherry Usher, and I am the upper elementary classroom teacher at Summit School. I'd like to add my perspective from inside the multi-grade classroom at Summit. It is a wonderful community, and I love being there. An example of why I enjoy multi-age grouping is that I'm able to present a topic, and the students group themselves according to their curiosity rather than their grade level to participate in many inquiry-based projects. Having taught for over 2 decades, I feel we have a unique model of learning that naturally fosters creative, innovative, problem-solving students who will be well prepared for the 21st century. So I'd like to put out there an open invitation to come on up and see us up in our very safe, small community. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak tonight that I don't have a form from? Okay, that concludes the public comments. Next on the agenda are our Resilient Schools presentation.
All right.
Dave, I'll hand it over to you.
Should I go ahead and stand up there?
Wherever you wish.
Forgive me if this goes off to you, then I'm not sure. Yeah. No, I'm not timing David. I'm just making sure it doesn't keep falling behind.
Hi there, I'm David White, and I'm going to talk for a little bit tonight about resilient schools, and I am going to use the board and show PowerPoint at some point when I get to it. So I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget the numbers. So I am an environmental educator. I've worked with all the OUSD schools for over 10 years now with the garden and agricultural programs that Food for Thought run. I also run an experiential watershed education program called Once Upon a Watershed, which is fiscally sponsored by the Oak Grove School, and it's active in 11 schools in the Ventura River watershed. I currently run this program with the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in OI Unified School Districts, and I've been doing this for about 7 years now. Outside of the Valley, I work with schools in 7 different school districts throughout Ventura and Santa Barbara as the Captain Planet Learning Garden Coordinator for these counties. The Captain Planet program is based in Atlanta, and it works with about 200 schools in Atlanta, New York, and California. I also work with Common Vision, a group which has planted and supports orchards at over 200 schools in California. And I'm here tonight to ask that OUSD provide leadership for a resilient schools program, and that as a core element of this program, they designate Miners Oaks Elementary as an environmental magnet school. So what is a magnet school and what is the Resilient Schools program? Well, as with almost any enterprise, it's about location, location, location. Miners Oaks Elementary neighbors Ojai Valley Land Conservancy's 58 acres Ojai Meadows Preserve, which is bounded on its eastern edge by Nordhoff High School. Classes from both schools use the meadows for nature-based education programs through partnerships with the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy and the Once Upon a Watershed program. Food for Thought walks the students from the elementary and the high school, sometimes together, to Poco Farm, a 4-acre farm on Stockbridge Lane, which is 2 blocks from Miners Oaks Elementary. And from that farm, students have helped plant, harvest, transport food to their respective school kitchens. Around the corner is the Oak Grove School, and through the Once Upon a Watershed program, students are able to experience their 180-acre old-growth woodland preserve that borders the Land Conservancy's meadow. So this is an incredibly inspiring community asset that we have in the heart of the Ojai Valley. What a place to teach students and to empower teachers to learn about resilient schools, and for educators from other districts to experience cutting-edge environmental education and to take those ideas and practices back to their own schools and communities. Magnet schools attract students and staff who want to participate in an inspired education system and an invigorated community. One idea is of office space for the non-profit partners who could provide an incubator setting for increased vibrancy and cross-pollination of efforts. Most importantly, we are inspiring the next generation so they can deal with the challenges ahead. And I just wanted to look at the news. I mean, the news is full of green initiatives. It was very interesting just looking at the student union. I mean, there's a couple of different schools in here. Restoring Natural Order, Ojai Valley School. They're out on the islands, Bioswales at Oak Grove. Green School initiatives all over, not just locally. But then I was given a journal from a school in India. The Green Schools Movement, Edible Schoolyard. One of our partners, Alice Waters, is an article about that in there. This is a movement. Green Schools is a movement. So a core practice for resilient schools is hydration of the landscape. And already we have gardens at Miners Oaks Elementary with fruit tree plantings. And we've drawn up a proposal for the State Water Quality Control Board DROPS program, which is Drought Response Outreach Program for Schools, that details the hardscape changes that would best benefit Miners Oaks and the other schools in the district. And the important thing is that a resilient schools program provides standard-based lessons for interpreting these hardscape changes so that buildings and landscape become the learnscape. I envision a self-funded organization that partners with the school district to provide enhanced environmental education, particularly at this school. We already have a team of environmental educators who work with me through Food for Thought, Oak Grove School, and the Center for Regenerative Agriculture. We have a nexus of non-profits that are providing educational support, particularly for this school. The 6th grade watershed program that we're developing at the moment and ready for rollout at Miners Oaks is called Our School the Watershed, which involves envisioning potential changes to the school's rain and stormwater management using sidewalk chalk and plants in pots. Locally, Ocean View School District is emerging as a green school district and has a model process in place for supporting and developing the resilient schools concept. Will Rogers in Ventura promotes itself as a two-way immersion school of environmental science. Currently, it has a waiting list for enrollment. I want to quote from David Sobel's book, Beyond Ecophobia. What is important is that children have an opportunity to bond with the natural world, to learn to love it before being asked to heal its wounds. And through the Resilient Schools program, we will have teachers trained at Miners Oaks so they know how to connect kids to nature and are confident in taking their students outside. To quote from County Award-winning teacher Chris Guzman from Will Rogers Elementary, most teachers still do not feel comfortable teaching children outdoors. And Janice Duncan at Miners Oaks confirmed that observation. Probably the most exciting thing is that our community already has a cutting-edge environmental education program that the school district can build on. People want to visit Ojai, and what better attraction for teachers than continuing education credits to learn through the Resilient Schools program. These are the training that teachers need. The source of the Resilient Schools program idea is a Northern California organization called Occidental Arts and Ecology, and you can find out more information about their Resilient Schools program at their website, which is oaec.org. I also just recently connected with Thomas Starr King's Environmental Magnet School in Silver Lake, and they identify themselves as a resilient school. So we have a team of inspired environmental educators working on this, and we're already self-funding. What I'm recommending for OUSD is that as it considers surplusing our schools, is to use that surplus space for education. Adult education, after-school programs, community programs, resilient school programs. We will have teachers come and be inspired in the heart of the Ojai Valley. We're already running adult ed workshops at this school. Let's develop that program. Edible education, place-based, landscape to learnscape, all elements of resilient schools. Miners Oaks Elementary really is an incredible and unique location. And people want to come to Ojai. Let them come and be inspired to teach and to make these connections in their own community. Think of the partnerships you already have, providing education at no cost to the district. I run Once Upon a Watershed on an aspirational budget at 11 schools of $60,000 a year. Our community has a belief in education. Let's grow from that one central spot. And again, an interesting idea is to lease a building to the nonprofits who run programs at OUSD schools. I just ask you to recognize the strength of your community. In Miners Oaks' case, probably around 200 families, 70% Title I. And that's the natural community center in Miners Oaks. Let's grow our educational outreach and our influence. Unintended good consequences are the outcome of working with regenerative systems, and I guess the question might be, what is a regenerative system? Well, one filter is to ask, if everybody did this, would it be a good thing? So what do you think about turning Miners Oaks Elementary into an environmental magnet school? I ask that you make it a funding priority. Magnet schools attract inter- and intra-district transfers because of their environmental efforts. And I want you all to be aware of the environmental leadership that the programs rooted at Miners Oaks already provide. And here's an example. So if we can go for the slideshow now. I hope you can see it. I'm not an expert at PowerPoint. We'll see.
Thank you.
But Teresa really knows how to run a computer. Let's see. Yeah. All right, so just a summary. I've got two summary slides about resilient schools. One is just bullet, and the other is more of a graphic, depending on how you like to see information. But resilient schools, to summarize, they're place-based experiential learning. The landscape becomes a learnscape. They're supported by community partnerships, and they extend beyond the traditional classroom, and they empower teachers to teach in the outdoors. Now, I wanted to give just one example, a real example of what I do with my concept of resilience. Let's see if this works. Let's see. No, can you forward it? Right. So, at Miners Oaks, here you go. Talking about technology. All right, we almost got it. Yeah, here we go. So here's an example of one element of this resilient school. At Miners Oaks Elementary, we have a 4x8 worm bin that processes some of the school's food waste. And we go ahead. Here, these are students who just took. Actually, that's the. If you go back, sorry, dude, my clicker's not working. Those are the compostable trays that Food for Thought helped fund to replace the styrofoam trays that went to the landfill every day, like hundreds of them. So now they're great things for the students to turn over. So go ahead, and Teresa. So we produce worm castings, which you can pick up at the seed swap that we're sponsoring on Saturday afternoon at the auditorium next door. And we'll have students there who have helped tend and raise the worms, who'll be there to educate you about worm castings and their use. Go ahead. So this photograph I took yesterday, and I'm sorry it's not very good, but I just snapped it, and it's amazing as an educator to have students fascinated by what you're teaching. And to the beauty of this, if we go to the next one, is unintended good consequences. I had no idea that this would become a salamander refuge, but it has. And these students love the salamanders, I gotta say. So they're chasing centipedes, they're amazed at the host of worms, they're picking out slugs, and they're petting the salamanders. We've got to get a little salamander habitat. So this worm bin produces about 25 gallons of castings in a season, which we can sell in 8-ounce bags as compost tea starter. But the lesson continues. Let's go on. So the worms really like the dark, and so this is on the north face of the building, and it's in full shade. It's an ideal habitat to grow mushrooms. And so, with the help of the Ojai Center for Regenerative Agriculture, the students grew mushrooms under their worm bin, and these are oyster mushrooms, which they harvested. Go ahead. And we've got some fungophilia here. So let's click through the students harvesting. Look at that, that's so cute.
Whoa.
And so they harvested them and they cooked them with kale and onions from the garden, and that's gourmet. And if you went to a zoo and asked for a plate of that, they'd charge you a lot of money for that. So this building, this worm bin is behind the most dilapidated building on that campus, and currently Food for Thought uses room 25 for storage, and that roof is in bad shape of that building. Let's go on to the next one. I'm not quite sure where I put in here. Go on. So yeah, that's the building we're talking about, and the garden is to the right. If we click ahead, sometimes when you're looking on plans, it doesn't really show you what's really going on. Hold on, go back one. Go back one. Another one. Thank you. Sorry, the color's not very good, but this is the edge of the Food for Thought garden, and previously that was our parking area, and in a period of about 6 years, we've made that into a little food forest. And so when you look at a plan of the buildings, you don't quite have a sense of what you need is to be there. Embodied cognition, I believe, is the phrase. So when you can land there, you get really a sense of the joy of children picking flowers and eating things out of that garden. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So this is the north face of that building. That's where the one worm bin is, where all these lessons are taking place. And this is a place that with appropriate funding, we can track 20,000 gallons of water easily in rainwater tanks here that then would feed adjacent school gardens easily off of that roof. No problem with those amounts of tanks. 5,000 gallon tanks are pretty easy to install. So let's see, where am I with this? So I ask that you consider this as a resource for local nonprofits that work with the schools and provide space for a resilient schools program, so we can teach teachers how to teach in the environment. So back to the worm bin. Slow Food USA. You can just stay on that one. That's fine. You just say on that. Yeah. So Slow Food USA, national organization, they came to visit our worm bin. And they were very impressed, so impressed that they want to fund those nationally. So we're a leader in environmental education already. And so that's the thing I want to make you aware of. This is not something we're aspiring to. We're already achieving it. And when you've got partnerships like we have with Captain Planet, with Slow Food USA, with Johnson Ohana, you have a tremendous reach and influence in the greening of public education in the United States. We're already providing leadership in this field. Please let Miners Oaks Elementary blossom as a center for environmental education, as a resilient schools magnet. Let's see, I've already gone over that the plans don't really show the true settings. But we can continue with hardscape removal and other drops elements guided by the generous help and incredible experience of Regina Hirsch. Now Regina has met with Josh Brown several times. She helped us write the drops grant proposal, met with Andy. Andy, very impressed with Regina. She's an outstanding professional that we're very lucky to have advise us on this. But basically, she can show us a way to leverage Measure J funds so that we can get additional funding through State Water Quality Control Board and other organizations to fund, and I want to use the language that she provided me here, to leverage funds to fix currently identified problems with integrated solutions. So this is not something that's out with what we're already looking at with Measure J funding to improve the hardscape of the buildings. This is integrated in there. It's already identified problems, just making it so that we can utilize those as teaching tools. The goal with hydration and where the stormwater folks would like us to go is that no water leaves the property. Rainwater tanks, bioswales, infiltration basins, ephemeral ponds, native vegetation, edibles, a drought-tolerant landscape becomes a learnscape. The key is that these wonderful, fundable hardscape modifications that hydrate the landscape are also linked to standards-based education that allows teachers to feel comfortable taking their students outside to learn. Teachers need to be taught about how to teach in the environment. And again, programs based at Miners Oaks are providing leadership in this realm. The Center for Regenerative Agriculture has already run 2 week-long programs at Miners Oaks where national and international professionals join with experts in soil science. We use the garden program there as a backdrop and teaching tool, showing off our composting program and making compost teas. And when you work in regenerative systems, unintended good consequences abound. What if there was a compost tea program at school that was doing experiments on the treatment of the soccer field? What if there were drought-tolerant fruit trees going along the southern edge of the campus, watered by water trapped from the roofs? What if teachers came from around the country and around the world to learn about teaching in the outdoors, using nature-based education, the techniques that we're pioneering here? This is not just a vision, it's a description of what's already happening. So I would ask that you please help base a resilient school program at Miners Oaks Elementary. And I guess my closing line is resilient schools, resilient communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
You want to do questions or what?
I have a question. So I had a few extra minutes, so I looked at the...
Well, I didn't even go over that one. That's the different graphic.
Yeah. Do you want to reference that?
Sure. I guess we should go over that. See, I spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's just a different way of looking. So you've got your kids in the middle. What do we want them to get? Skills, knowledge, and behavior. And what are all the things that are available to them? Well, life skills, compassionate communication, that's the art of listening. Academics, of course, arts and music, nourishment for the soul, ecological literacy. And you see that the concentric circles are the traditional classroom, and then the garden and kitchen room classroom. I mean, we're looking at models like the Alice Waters models, where you know, home ec is part of the school again. School cafeteria, everything that happens at the school is a lesson for the children. Everything that happens, whatever you do there, whatever you do, it's a lesson for the kids. And of course it extends into the home and community where we have our partnerships and our leverage. And I think if we put on the next one, actually, you know, just to hear some of the partners that just off the top of my head, you know, Land Conservancy, Oak Grove School, Food for Thought, CRA, Ojai Trees, Surfrider, Stormwater, they want to put an ocean-friendly garden there. Many, many more. I just saw a Rotary grant for chaparral, right? So, there's many organizations that are willing to partner. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so my question speaks to Proposition 39. I had a little extra time today, so I looked at the governor's budget for education, and I found this, and this was a surprise to me, but clearly you would know about this, but does this speak to Proposition 39, energy retrofit programs? Actually, examples of water conservation efforts made by the state special schools include reduced irrigation, removing turf and replacing with drought-tolerant plantings, installing additional water controllers, installing low waterless fixtures. So is that what Regina is working on?
It certainly sounds related, but
Okay.
I don't think that's a description of a state water quality control board.
Okay, this then would be something additional perhaps. Yeah.
Regina doesn't work on Prop 39 matters. We actually already have our allocation for that.
For Prop 39?
Every
Okay.
district has their Prop 39 allocation. We're in the third year of a 5-year funding period. So we're getting a total of about $630,000 or so over that 5-year span. And it's actually, the Prop 39 is actually called the Green Jobs Bill Act. And it really was intended around certainly some of those water conservation, but the heavy emphasis has been really on electricity really electricity and some gas efficiency and enhancement opportunities. So a lot of districts are using it to swap out light bulbs, or they're using it to bring in timers. We always are hot or cold in this room, but that sort of thing that we already are on the cutting edge on is having the, instead of allowing a room to be air conditioned for 8 hours a day when it's vacant, you actually have those switches and stuff. So that we are working on developing our plan on the way in which we're, expending those funds. But
Excellent.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it definitely could partner with some of these types of things as well.
Excellent.
And I guess for the public, I kind of wanted to give a context to David's comments. A lot of discussion in these meetings have been about what are some ideas just to generally make the district better, not necessarily closing a school. And so some of the ideas that have been thrown around are the idea of a magnet school or different things. So we wanted to kind of give Dave a chance to present a new and unique way of looking at education, and it becomes part of our overall discussion. How can we really make OUSD better as a whole, not necessarily close a school, but what are all the options we can look at? So I just wanted to give some context to why he was talking about resilient schools.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah. So actually I have a question. So kind of on that topic, one thing that, as we've discussed in the past, magnet schools, there has been some hesitancy toward, a full wrapping our arms around it, due to we're a small district. We wouldn't want to have one school become the, art school, because really all of our schools are art schools. Our desire is to try to make the strongest program in each, and that was one thing I wasn't quite sure. I love not almost every single thing that you mentioned, I'm totally on board with. But what I wasn't quite sure with was I didn't fully understand why we'd have to isolate those to Myers Oaks. Is there a reason that Myers Oaks was selected to the exclusion of all other schools within the district?
So it's not an exclusionary program. So the idea is that all schools can participate in elements of the Resilient School program. It's just that Myers Oaks has emerged as a center for that. And I think a lot of that's due to its location, and also just the community connections. The people that I work with, their children go to Myers Oaks. Okay. But it's, again, I think that location is key. And it's adjacent to the Meadows, to Oak Grove, to Poker Farm, to Nordhoff, all within walking distance. I mean, when Once Upon a Watershed was first funded, which is 10 years ago, it was called Once Upon a Wetland. And it was a project that was with Myers Oaks, Nordhoff, and Oak Grove. And Sarah Brooke Benjamin, who wrote that NOAA BWET grant, did it in a crazed 3-day spell. And it was ranked #1 in the state because of the physical location of the Ojai Meadows in the middle of those schools that you could walk to it all. And that walkability is a key thing. And there's a wonderful gate at the back of Myers Oaks in the fence between the school and the Meadows Preserve. I love taking students out there, and it's 2909, and there you are. You're in the Meadows, and it's incredible. It's incredible. The location is is unbelievable.
So it would be like spearheading it, but it wouldn't
Yes.
necessarily be like, oh, this is the only school.
This is the only one, that's right. And I think that, one of the things that came up as I was thinking about this was that idea of having the nonprofits that are partnering with the schools based there. And that's a very interesting use of surplus property, because these guys are already your partners. They're already providing enhanced and financially supported education for the district. And that, I think, is, the grant we're writing right now is an EPA grant to teach the teachers, and that's through Oak Grove. But that would probably be based at Miners Oaks. So it's interesting, and that's a major partner that you've got there. And Oak Grove has an outreach to Britain, to India. I mean, that's an incredible school partnership to have. And they're fiscally sponsoring the Once Upon a Watershed program. And when we're looking at teaching the teachers, I think that's fundable. I think there's a lot of interest in that. So when it's, the magnet school thing, that's to attract teachers.
So you're saying the location lends itself to the beginnings of all of this, but it could filter through the district. You see that opportunity.
When we looked with Josh at at this DROPS grant, we wrote up for the major schools that he had hydration issues with, flooding and runoff, and Tuapa was one of them, and I think Matilaha was the other one.
Tuapa's bad.
So the hydration again is a key thing, and if you've got standard-based education that that teachers can take their students out and observe stuff and do lessons. They're not just necessarily science-based or biology, but they're math, they're social studies. There's so many different. The Captain Planet Foundation has curriculum that goes across all the disciplines for up to grade 8 now. So we're talking about using the Learnscape in many different ways, not just environmental science, for instance, which is what Will Rogers tends to identify himself as.
Well, another way of looking at it is to look at every school has some unique features to it. And Summit, for example, is very close to being a gateway to the Los Padres National Forest,
Absolutely.
Which is an incredible resource.
It's got a killer garden.
And then talking about a watershed. So the point there is that, Topa, I'm just giving you examples, Topa is a truly embedded in the community school. That's why it has the least amount of inter-school transfers, because it services that community. So community centers of some kind that bring the community in would be a natural at Topa. Topa used to be a leader in service learning, and then that petered out for whatever reason. But all these things can happen. And the resources in this valley extend not just in this valley, but we are surrounded. And I have a background in utilizing those resources for education, so I'm familiar with that. And it is virtually untouched. And those are even further partnerships to deal with, okay, such as Los Padres Forest Association, things like this. So there's lots of partnerships out there, including the Forest Service itself, which is very interested now in doing that, and had been a partner in the past. So there are lots of things like that to look at, and
there's lots of different green school programs out there, and there's something just about the resilient schools concept that engenders warmth in my heart. And really, when I teach kids outdoors, I'm lucky. I get to teach kids outdoors, and it's such a joyful experience. And I guess I had a bit of a hard time in the classroom, so I want to encourage. And we got that amazing resource. What a thing! Let's go and use it, and let's teach other people how to use it. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda is reviewing the report from Eric Wild. Did everyone get a copy of the...
I have copies in the back for the public, and I actually printed copies as well if anyone didn't have a chance to print. I just have them go around.
I just got it today.
emailed out. Maybe it wasn't emailed out.
One of the problems, Glenn, is we just got it tonight.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet.
Okay, so good. That's plenty of time.
They're coming around. I made sure I had 11 copies coming around.
Yeah.
escuelas resistentes.
Thank you.
So as a way of introducing this material, there was some questions about property values at the 5 elementary schools in the valley, and the district reached out to Eric Wild, who's a broker here in town, and he generously provided a report that just gives what they estimate to be the market value of the 5 properties of the 5 elementary schools. So that's what you have in front of you, 1 page per property.
I see in the cover letter, it says, for the basis of these appraisals, we made assumptions on being allowed to residentially develop them.
Right.
And this means we sell the property as is to a residential developer, and the developer removes the existing buildings and infrastructure and then develops the property? Is that what that means?
I think the answer to that question actually goes beyond what I don't think we can answer that question at this point. I don't know the specific process that would take place.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for specifics, but the excuse me, the basic assumption, if a residential developer wants to buy a piece of property that's a green field, there's a considerable amount of cost in reducing an elementary school campus to a green field. Mm-hmm. And the question is, who bears that cost if we're looking at what's the property worth? Mm. So if it's $500,000 to take out all of the buildings and the infrastructure and leave the stubs of water, gas, and electricity to be further developed later, then does that $500,000 come out of this number?
Or is it something that the developer
Or is it something the developer bears?
Right.
The developer bears. The question is are these as-is estimates?
I'm asking about the basic assumptions behind the numbers.
Yeah, that's a simple question. Is this an as-is estimate?
It is an as-is, okay.
No,
we don't know.
He repeated the question. He didn't answer
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
And Eric...
Okay, yes, we agree on what the question is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And to that point, I mean, in the previous paragraph, we see if we were to properly identify market values for any of these properties, we would have to meet with the appropriate city or county planning departments. So there's, this is an estimate.
Right, this is
Ultimately.
repurposing to a commercial purpose.
Correct.
Which would require rezoning and a bunch of other stuff.
Right.
The
And I
assumption
wanna-
that was the buyer.
And I want to point out that for our purposes, we don't have to get into this level of detail in our recommendation to the school board.
It's just an estimate.
Because we don't know, do we, whether they want to lease the property or sell the property, or that's all
Or
sort
even
of speculative,
pay.
isn't it? If we got to that point.
Very much so. Yeah,
We would
very
go
speculative.
over everything that we've already gone over, that Andy has explained in detail about how it has to go to other agencies to see if they had a public use for it, and a number of other items that
Which has a whole different evaluations scheme.
Being on the board, I would say we had a very informal expression of opinion, of personal opinion. Would you be interested if you were asked at a future point? That was sort of put before the board.
What was the question?
If we decided to sell a property, would you be interested in that? And all of the 5 members, at the time, it was not a formal vote, it was just an informal sort of pulse taking, said, no, we were not interested in selling, we were interested in leasing. That was at that time, and it was a pulse, it wasn't a vote, but just the general feeling of all 5 members at that point was not selling, leasing.
And that was related to the 5 elementary schools?
It was related to any district property.
Okay.
Okay, it's good to know.
And did I interrupt you? Okay. Okay, well, why don't we take a moment and go through these, through the numbers anyhow. The language on each is fairly similar, except that we see differences in acreage and market value. So Summit, in my packet, Summit's first. Okay, so let's do mine ourselves. Since we'll do the majority.
The packets are alphabetical.
Okay. So Miners Oaks is on 7.36 acres and appraises at between 1.5 and 1.75 million.
This is for a sale.
Yeah. Miramani, it's on a larger plot, 8.75 acres, 1.75 to 2.25 million. Which one's
Higher because it's adjacent to a highway.
And it's a larger
Yeah,
piece of
a little
property,
bit,
a little bit larger.
It's marginally larger, but I think it's the location.
Yeah, it also has open space around it, there's more open space around it as well. Yeah.
San Antonio, just under 7 acres, 2.25 to 2.75 million.
And I'm guessing that's because of location on the east end? Is it
Yeah.
just properties just valued higher out there?
Yeah. I'll bet that's true. Topatopa, 9.22 acres, so that's the largest campus. 2.75 to 3.25 million.
And Summit,
Oh, and Summit. I missed Summit.
that's the smallest.
I did east to west. And Summit's on 5.42 acres and appraised value is $1 million to 1.25. Are there any questions about this?
So it's nice that he
We
did
don't
it.
have the preparer of the report here
Yeah.
today.
It's the Chamber Gala tonight, so unfortunately,
Oh,
he's tied up at the Chamber
yeah.
Gala tonight, so couldn't make it.
I would be interested in a number of things, particularly since the board is not, at the moment, interested in selling any property. I'm wondering what kind of lease terms the board might be amenable to. We don't have a lot of residential areas in the city, or in the district, excuse me, where the homes are more than 100 years old. Mine's close, it's about 90. But if we had a 75-year lease or a 99-year lease, is that something that the board would be amenable to doing? It would be for certain purposes equivalent to selling the land.
So you're thinking like leveling it, using...
I don't know what would happen to it. But if the acreage was leased for 99 years, we'd still have rezoning problems, but there are at least potential deals that could be made to put a lot more money back into the district and make up for the difference between Measure J Plan A and Measure J Plan C, which we settled for, which was about 1/3 of what people said we needed to really fix up the school district.
So I guess that's hypothetical right now, right? We don't know, what are you, we don't know, I guess, what you're willing to do, and you guys don't know yet.
Well, and in fact, I almost wish I didn't hear what you said. Because I really don't want our deliberations to, there are so many unknowns beyond the recommendation that we are going to make to the board. And the fact is, we're in an election year, and there may be turnover on the board in November. I don't know if there's going to be, and I don't know how long.
And people could change their minds based on what you guys.
Exactly.
That's what we want you
And there's
guys
a lot,
to do,
and there's a
is to
lot
get
of
the-
process that happens here. In fact, maybe this is just a good moment to forecast. I do believe that at our next meeting, which is next week, we're going to start just putting up ideas on, everyone's going to give an opinion. Everyone here on the committee is going to offer an opinion about where we're headed. We're going to see if we have some sort of consensus. If we can get to a consensus, if and when we get to a consensus, then we will pause for a 2-week break and hold a public hearing on our consensus recommendation.
Well, even 6 to 5 is a consensus.
It is. That's exactly right. And so I almost feel like I think for us to guess what the board may do or guess who may be interested in a specific property complicates our work. Our work really is to identify surplus
If we have
space.
surplus space.
If we have surplus space, and make a recommendation on that basis to the board. And then, after we have our public hearing and after we make a recommendation to the board still has to go through a number of steps, including additional public hearings, I'm sure, that would invite additional public comment before the board makes the decision. All we are is a citizens advisory committee. You know, we're just making a recommendation.
But I would agree, Glenn, that I think we should be utilizing our independent judgment and making the recommendation to the board and trying to intuit what the board wants to do. Even from your comment there, I think introduces a bias into the whole process, which removes that independent judgment. So I would say we, you know, like the judge instructing the jury to disregard that comment.
Well, I mean, more than, and then to add to that, it seems like you're also trying to speculate what's a greater good. I mean, it seems like theoretically a person could argue that it's a greater good to take Miners Oaks and create this environmentally friendly school. Who cares what we could sell it for or rent it for, if that makes sense? I mean, you get into a lot of hypotheticals and speculatives and philosophical differences. What's a better use for the space, which I think maybe we don't need to try to speculate on monetarily what we can make from a space.
Yeah,
You know?
I do think it needs to be said, you know, we want to publicly thank Eric Wild for putting these reports together, but I agree with what the committee members are saying. You know, there's things that we do need to keep in mind, but to speculate all the permutations and combinations of things that might happen might get dangerous and have a long discussion.
Okay, so we were, go ahead.
Just before we go on, because I missed a couple of meetings, where are we with visiting the properties as groups? Are we going to follow through with that?
I think it was left with, if you were interested, talk to Andy.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you get
Yeah, I
any?
did not receive a single request
Okay.
to line up a meeting.
I could never find the free time in the last couple of weeks to do that, so I just simply could not do it.
Yeah.
I want to do it, but I
So
couldn't.
that offer still stands, is that
Absolutely
correct?
still stands. If anyone's interested, email me. We can work with the principals and figure out a time where we can bring a couple folks together.
And I just
Gabby?
want,
Yes.
sorry.
In case of, I mean, I didn't understood really, in case of any property get, try to be sold and then to do the rezoning in the area and stuff, who carries the expenses for that? The district to rezoning? Or how did that work? How much it will cost really the district?
I'm actually saying, we don't have the answer to that question, and I think it's beyond our scope anyway.
So-
I don't think we have to have that answer.
So I appreciate Linda's comment. I too would like to thank Eric and Coldwell Banker for generously donating their time and actually doing exactly what I requested when I did speak with him. There are a lot of things up in the air right now where we're looking at 5 separate campuses and being very far away from making a determination about any single one. And certainly then also then making a determination about a lease, which may be a 99-year land lease or a 5-year, you know, with current structures needing to remain as is. Lots of different things. And for them to give a full analysis on rental and sale values, as they say here, it would involve them having to actually go to the county for 4 of our schools or to the city for the one, talk about rezoning. It would require a number of different ways in which you view the possibilities of that property. And just a lot of different, you know, factors that are at play. What I thought was most important, why I actually thought it was okay just to exclude all of those, is because they equally will be impacted by that. So we, again, have 4 separate schools. The only one that's not in the county jurisdiction is TOPA, but the other 4 schools would all equally be having to work with the county on potentially rezoning. Now, that doesn't mean that a, you know, campus that's in a more rural area may have a easier time rezoning than a higher, you know, density. There's obviously factors there, but in general, they're all going to have to go through the same potential concerns about rezoning. They also are all going to have to figure out whether or not the sale and the expenses associated with the sale, for instance, rezoning, are going to lie with the developer or the purchaser or with the district, and whether or not the property itself, the buildings, the personal real property on the land is going to be, again, lower, you know, or removed by the district, or again, something that the developer would accept as is or have to potentially be eliminating. So because he didn't take it into account on any of them, I think it actually still creates a fair way to view the properties to get 2 points out of it. First way is regardless of sale or lease, I think it gives us some framework to look at comparing the school sites. If someone did want to weight this as a factor, when we looked at the operational savings on an annual basis, we looked at the Measure J savings, the, you know, 1 million up to 4 million potentially. Here's one more piece that you can actually compare. Okay, well, we now know that generally speaking, Topa is a more valuable property than Summit School. Now, some people may have said that was intuitive. smaller campuses, different geographic areas, but now we have some sort of evidence that really actually concrete gives us the ability to make that assumption. The other thing is, again, is that it gives us a frame of reference of we now know it's highly unlikely that we're going to be able to get $10 million for a single property. It also is unlikely that we're only looking at the same sort of thing, the operational savings, where we're talking about 100,000, 200,000. We have some ballpark understanding if it was sold. We know very well that the lease is going to, garner something much lower, but it gives us a frame of reference to view the, that this topic in the, series of things we've looked at monetarily.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, because we've been crunching so many different numbers, and as Gabby said at our last meeting, what's the number for a lease or a sale?
Yeah.
So.
And is your argument is sort of like, we're not going to get some sort of like $10 million like payoff,
Right.
or, okay.
We're not going to get 4.
Right, yeah. So I think that's a significant thing to keep in mind. And I just was going to say, to Dimitri's point, I would like to invite, I think I can say this because I've discussed it with Teresa, anyone who would like to come to San Antonio's, what's it called?
I'll never forget this.
Oh, no, I was going to say the 10 o'clock, what they do in the morning. Assembly, thank you. My brain, when I'm in public, I get a little nervous. Assembly, 10 o'clock in the mornings on Friday. You can come sit and watch the assembly. So you're welcome to do that if you'd like.
In the amphitheater?
In the amphitheater. It's very cool.
This is San Antonio?
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Can I reference, is it okay to go back to last meeting and reference a couple of points? Sometimes things fly so quickly. It's like you read the awesome notes that Marianne takes and, oh, that was a really good point. There's a couple of things that really stood out to me in last meeting. You pointed out, Glenn, that we should keep in mind the Delinka study, and that's the study that projects attendance, correct? Potential attendance.
Enrollment, yeah.
Enrollment. So that's for our audience tonight. The Delinka study, that we would be maintaining capacity for the number of students projected through 2023 at about 1441, which isn't, and Marianne noted that she was struck by the Delinka study that there is no precipitous drop in enrollment forecast through 2023. So, or if we're looking at, again, the reasoning for this committee was that, do we have excess properties? And if we're not going to see a precipitous drop in enrollment in the next, 6 or 7 years, then, I guess I'm sort of scratching my head thinking, repurposing our property, sure, that would be great. The drops program and I took a ton of notes when you were talking, David. I just really, again, went to caution that, again, the numbers, you guys have heard me say that every time, there's so much potential repurposing that David and a lot of, our speakers have brought up, so.
Yeah, the lack of a further drop in enrollment, I think, means that while we are right now about 35% or so, maybe 40% below full capacity of the 5 campuses, it's not likely to get worse over the next 6 or 7 years.
Right, but again, like
But it's
Marianne
not going to get
said,
that much better.
what's
either.
full capacity? Because if we're talking about portables, if we're including portables in that number in terms of capacity, these schools.
We could reduce capacity by getting rid of
We could open up some land
portables
space.
that we shouldn't be using.
Yeah.
Sure. And that would help with Measure J, because we wouldn't have to upgrade them.
So those are just things to consider. I got to again say on record, Marianne, amazing notes.
I think so. It was
Make sure those appear in the
complicated.
minutes
It was a
next
very
time.
complicated
For
discussion
confidence.
that we had about all these portables, and Andy's point was that even if we didn't improve the portables, we're still far behind the ideal amount of money that we need to spend on each of the schools. But what I was struck by in that conversation, maybe that you could go over a little bit more, Andy, is you talked about deficit spending for this year and the next year, and how we'd be looking at $500,000 magnitude of cuts, I think, for 2017 and 18. So could you talk to why that is and what $500,000 in cuts looks like for 2017-18?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year was not deficit spending, actually, because we did receive a significant increase in one-time funding for 15-16. So we were able to bring our reserves up higher than they've been in actually the past 6 or 7 years. But we are looking at next year, as we are not anticipating that one-time. We can't budget based on one-time funding returning, hence the name one-time funding, although Governor Brown does really enjoy giving us one-time funding year after year, but it just isn't prudent budgeting to assume that's coming.
So the deficit spending definition, you're including how much the reserve is supposed to be?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about, in deficit spending, are you talking about a reserve amount?
So deficit spending would be completely separate from reserve, because deficit's looking at revenues and expenditures in the current year, versus a reserve is kind of like what's left in your bank account at the end of the year or throughout the year. So all your income's coming in, your mortgage payment and everything else, for an individual, that's really what we're looking at for deficit, is the revenues and expenditures in a single year. But that's totally separate from whether or not we had $20 million in the bank account when we were going through this whole period, or if we only had $1 million, which the number looks like it's going to end this year at about $1.5 million is how much we're going to be ending the year with as a saving, or as our reserve.
And are we near or at the minimum reserve that is either required or recommended for schools?
So we are, this year, we have returned to the minimum requirement for a school of our size, or district of our size, is 3% of our annual expenditures. This year, that number ends up being right around $750,000, and so 3%, $750 we are at this year. When I said we're actually at $1.5 million, that means that we do have an unappropriated balance that's separate from that minimum required reserve of an additional $750,000. That's $750,000, that second, the non-3%, but the amount we have over it is what's going to be drawn down next year as we return to deficit spending if we don't see additional one-time dollars like we saw this year.
So we're looking at what, May 1st is when we get the adjusted budget back from the state of California, to Governor Brown's budget?
It comes in early May, early to mid-May, usually around the 10th.
Okay.
So that's when the governor comes out with his revision, but the ultimate budget's not approved. The legislature used to have this drag on until September or so, and then all of a sudden when we had a law that passed that said you're not getting paid if you don't pass it by June 15th, suddenly they figured out all their concerns and they get passed on June 15th each year. So the legislature passes by June 15th, and then the governor has to sign by June 30th. So we feel we have a really good sense that we can create a budget off of the governor's revision that comes out in early to mid-May, but technically that's not the actual budget or the finalized budget from the state. That comes, like I said, in June.
Thank you.
So going back to your underlying question, we're not deficit spending this year. We are projecting a deficit spend for next year and the year following if we don't see those additional one-time dollars coming in. However, we are looking better than when I told you $500,000 last week. That was before we'd been working our second interim. We're still working through the numbers to make our budget revision for this year, just so everyone knows. When we create a budget in the May-June timeframe, and it starts for our fiscal year, for the school district start July 1, we're responsible to make revisions to it at, periods throughout the year. And so we call that the first interim revision happens in the fall, the second interim revision happens in, actually about right now, it's going to the board March 15th. And so we make these, revisions based on, we didn't know that SoCal Edison was going to increase the, kilowatt hour charge, and so now our utilities are a little bit higher. Or we budgeted at the beginning of the year that, X staff member was going to be with us all 12 months, but we didn't realize they were actually planning on retiring in December. So there's all sorts of reasons that you have, a need to revise your budget through the year, and that's what we do. And so we're looking at revising the current year budget, and it is looking more positive than we were previously expecting by, we're still finalizing numbers, but it will be at least $100,000 to the positive from where we were previously planning.
So the 2017-18.
So 17-18, I think at this point, without having, again, finalized that revision that will come to anyone that wants to get those numbers, I can provide after the March 15th budget or March 15th board meeting, where you're certainly welcome to attend. I am certain that we're going to be below the $500,000 number as the amount that we need to cut in 17-18. Based on, remember we talked about a few weeks ago, the governor's January budget, the first proposal he came out with for next year, as well as now looking at our individual budget revision for this year. So the number that we publicly have currently on record for 17-18 is $500,000 in staffing cuts. I am certain that's not going to be the number come March 15th.
Be less.
It will be less.
So the reason I ask this is that we had this conversation when it's a fiscal crisis. And I didn't think that we were in a fiscal crisis. I didn't think that was what had prompted this committee. And then you confirmed that we're not in a fiscal crisis. So that was not the reason that we formed a 7-11 committee. But you did go into this.
Right. We certainly still have difficult financial times ahead of us. Any district that is just remaining stagnant enrollment-wise is actually going to be losing their purchasing power each year, because as you remain at an even enrollment, the cost of your staff every single year increases, because there's a step and column increase for certificate, and there's longevity opportunities and step increases for classified staff. And so even if you keep status quo with your staff, you are looking at, you're going to have eventually a deficit problem right there. However, it's exponentially greater for a declining enrollment district to have to deal with those same issues, because again, they're still having the step and column increases, they're still seeing significant changes from the state like we are when it comes to various requirements they're asking districts to contribute to, like the pensions. So we've seen a huge reduction in revenue relative to the way expenditures have been trending up. And so even though we are in no way in the same condition we were in 5 years ago, when we were in the having to make some very difficult staffing reductions due to a number of factors, both again that declining enrollment, as well as just everyone knows how difficult the economy was a few years ago. We're not in that period, but we're also not in the same type of period that we were in when we were a 4,000 student district, and the type of options that we had at that point. So I wouldn't label this a fiscal crisis by any means. We're not there. I don't know if we were there a few years ago, but we certainly were closer to what might be labeled that. But right now we still have to be very cautious with where we are financially.
So then we talked about operationally and I think facilities, you have the terms for it. We were only going to save a very small portion of our overall budget. And so that wasn't going to have a huge impact on our declining financial condition.
If we were to
close the school.
The operational costs were not going to be very much changed.
So we looked at that over, just for those watching at home or those in the audience, we looked at over the meeting 2 meetings ago, as well as last meeting, and the Star ran a very accurate article a few weeks ago about the potential for operational savings that would come from both the reduction in facility costs. If you're not operating a facility, you're likely going to have lower electricity usage at that site, obviously. As well as some potential staffing savings or reductions that could come from not having the additional school site open. So what we looked at was, for the larger school sites, that would be on the upper end, maybe close to $250,000 a year in savings. Now we're at a $25 million a year budget, and so $250,000 is roughly 1% of our budget. That doesn't sound like a whole lot, but then last week we did talk about what does that money actually get you? What would $225,000 or so get you, down to what does $100,000 potentially get you, which is what we identified the potential savings from a smaller school like Summit. So you're correct, Marianne, that we stated that's not in a $25 million budget, $250,000 doesn't seem like a whole lot, and in reality it's not a whole lot, but it also could go toward salary enhancements, when after 8 years of only seeing a single salary enhancement, I guarantee the staff is going to say that they would still appreciate the 1.5% that could buy, or the 3 new teachers that could help contribute toward, or the additional classified staff, both to help with grounds or to help with IT or to help in different areas. So not a great deal of money. It's not life-changing money for the district, but certainly would help during an otherwise tight and difficult financial situation.
And then that's not a constant, because some of that could be, well, I don't know if that's right, but some of it could be offset by the revenue enhancing opportunities we have through some of our districts, through some of our schools with district of choice. So there are those factors to weigh in. So we talked
Absolutely
about
correct that we did not
Miners,
factor
Oaks,
in,
and
when we looked at the expenditure savings, we did not factor in the potential loss of revenue that could come from if we lost inter-district students. We've talked extensively about inter-district students bring in, a significant amount of funding with them because we are paid based on enrollment, based on our attendance of students. And so if we looked at a school closure, we have not been able to calculate what that amount of lost revenue if students chose not to move to another school
So I just
site.
want to go over this again and hear it again from you, Annie, and thank you so much for that perspective, because it's not just, this amount of figure. We have so many other things to balance and weigh.
Well, and Merv brought up the whole ADA. We have how many students absent on any given day, and what that does for our ADA, and something as simple as a Saturday school, which I know Dawn Damianos over at Miners Oaks Elementary, she does periodically. Something, some simple things to put in place that would offset, perhaps to a great degree.
Which of those things are in place, just to reiterate, that the Saturday school is something that is, currently.
Is that in place at every school site, though?
I know San
I'm not
Antonio
sure if it's
doesn't.
in school or in place at every school, but I know it's something that's
So
certainly
we
being
put a
utilized.
price tag on specific operating expenses at each of the schools. I don't know that we've put a specific price tag on the district of choice, I know we've gone over necessary small schools. But that might be something that we would be weighing, just looking at
Right.
black and white
So,
numbers.
well, yeah, the challenge is, and I totally hear your point, the operating expenses and the personnel savings from closing a campus are quantifiable. What happens when you close a school in terms of inter-district transfers? I just don't know how to quantify that.
Well, except Hank said we have 200 net increase,
Right.
and he talked about how Miners Oaks and Miramonte are a draw. He probably has the numbers from
Well,
Well, I think the assumption
here.
I think the assumption we made is that if you close the school, you will have a reduction of inter-district transfers. Particularly on some of the campuses.
Understood. Yeah, and I
We
get
would
that.
have some drop.
Some
What
in
that would
Miramont.
be, who knows?
Yeah.
And it's not 100% quantifiable. It might be kind of quantifiable, but it won't be concrete.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this.
Without surveying parents, I don't see how we could even begin to, other than just saying what each student loss would cost in revenue. Because I wouldn't want to make the assumption that if Miramonte closed, the Oakview parents and other parents who are choosing to be a part of Ojai Unified would all of a sudden refuse to go to Myers Oaks. I think that there's actually a strong assumption that many of those families would go between those two sites. I agree with you that on the east end of town, that with Santa Paula students and Mupu students who are attending Summit, lower likelihood that they may want to continue to come down to San Antonio, although they currently typically stay in our district after they leave Summit, and they are willing to go to Matoaha and on to Nordhoff. And so I do think that it's really difficult for us to try to even begin that estimate of which families would choose to leave the
I
district.
do want to say, though, that I think, and this may be what you're getting at, that it's possible that we could just do way more damage than we would do good by closing a school. And I think, I think of San Antonio is a good example of that potential, but I think that's potentially across the board. With some, even you could damage Topa because kids from San Antonio would have to go to, some of the kids from San Antonio would necessarily have to go to Topa, you'd be damaging there, you'd be impacting individual schools so greatly that even though you can't maybe monetarily or numerically quantify it, I think it's potentially psychologically and numerically quite damaging to the district, and maybe more so than anything you'd possibly gain. I think.
Well, yeah,
I think you're kind of going in that
I wanted
direction.
to just have us keep it in mind, because we are looking at those numbers. We had this summary of costs for certain district expenditures that we actually had, quantified and what that would translate into, but we don't really know all of the other amounts that translate, that we have access to now through the
It's a big unknown.
district.
And we also looked at the fact that putting more students at any single school can actually achieve economies of scale. It can have better educational community, collaboration. That's important for teacher retention. If we're paying near the bottom of the rung in salaries in the district, second lowest, and not inexpensive place to live, then there has to attract teachers, because without teachers, then we're what are we doing? So
collaborative environment.
Yeah. So what that harm or benefit is something that's very subjective. It's very real, but very hard to project which is going to happen. And for every damage you can think of, you can argue a benefit. I'm not projecting we should do this. I'm just saying that we've looked at all the different things, and qualitatively, any number of ways we can go, and then speculate on those results.
Well, that's very well put, Chris. I'm just saying that is our really hard challenge.
Yes. So many variables.
Ultimately, the boards.
What is the current ADA, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. Current ADA is about 2480. 2,480. Our enrollment is just under 2,600.
And that's average daily attendance.
Correct. Right.
And the enrollment is?
I mean, if you potentially, if you lost 50 students, only 50, based on, that's $124,000.
That's what it, yeah.
That's like more than half of what you would quote unquote gain by closing a large
For
school.
those 120 kids, if they actually turned up to school, is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is if you lost 50 kids, 50 kids.
50 kids would result in a much greater loss in revenue than...
Yeah, I think you're...
Oh, I got, okay. So
ADA is how many students are in their seats on a daily basis.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, the money, like the money per student is what I meant.
Right, so...
Much higher, 3 times as high.
Right.
So no, if we lost 50 students...
Okay, sorry.
The loss in revenue would be somewhere between 430,000 up to 500, depending on the type of student and revenue that they may generate individually.
Okay, sorry.
So actually, we'll say 400 up to 500,000,
That's like twice
depending
what you
on
would...
the actual student.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
twice
a
what
loss
you would...
of 50 students, again, just like in declining enrollment, when we lose 50 students just naturally through graduation and not having incoming cohorts, same size, it's a very large impact. So 50 student loss would be a large financial impact.
So I think it is somewhat quantifiable. I don't think it's necessarily completely hypothetical that if you closed a school, you would lose 50, you could potentially lose 50 kids. I mean, that's not a lot.
Right.
That's not a lot. And I know if you close San Antonio, you'd lose quite a few. I don't know what would happen at Summit. I would assume it could happen at any school.
Speaking to
It's really important.
the other options that, we can talk about other than closing a school, is it okay to ask a member of the room to say something?
No, it's not.
Okay, so I'll ask Andy. You have to answer. It's fine, okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so Don Damiano, so I'm gonna put you on the spot. You're the only Saturday school I know, because my son went to your school. What's the typical turnout when you do Saturday school, and how often do you do that?
I do it twice a year.
Okay.
One in usually December in the winter, and then one in the spring. And our attendance averages around, well, it depends. It depends on, I'm going to say around 70 kids.
Okay.
Well, we think we've gotten up to 100.
December's usually like 100.
December's very popular.
Okay. That's pretty incredible. And if that were, is there a reason you only do it twice? I know that's to make up for absences. That's the real reason for Saturday school, correct?
Right. If any student comes to Saturday school and they haven't missed a day, then we don't get anything for them, but we do not turn them away because it's a lot of fun. So, I don't know. I just try to really get a lot of them to attend when they come, when we do it twice a year. I think, does Nordhoff do it a little more often, possibly?
They do size?
Merv, do you know?
Again,
I haven't ever seen one.
that amount of dollars is down in the weeds, along with the operational savings of closing a school.
I know that San Antonio also does summer school, or
Saturday school?
Thank you, sorry.
Okay, I guess I'm speaking to that because what if district-wide we did Saturday schools? I mean, just to really put that out there, you guys. Put these things in place, like what David was talking about, having a magnet school and perhaps drawing more people in from, Oakview. having Saturday schools. Those are the only two off the top of my head right now, but I think we've talked about a couple of other things. And what does say, okay, so let's say this, 70 times 5 sites. I know that's not possible, but let's say an average of 50 times 5 sites. If we did it bi-monthly, every other month, I'm probably saying that wrong, that's 5 times 50, is 250 over the course of, let's say, 4 times a year. Would that make an impact?
So I'm not quite sure I understand why a decision around the 5 versus 4 or 3 schools would impact whether or not we'd want to still do those sorts of activities. I think that no matter what, the idea of Saturday school is a wonderful idea that we can look at how it can be, how it can increase its usage, regardless of any decision that this board comes to, or committee comes to. But 250 students, 4 times a year, 1,000 days that we'd be collecting would work out to be.
What's a school year in terms of days?
What did we say, about $155, I think was the last time we talked about, was it 50?
No, I think it was only,
I can actually pull out my calculator.
$180?
Is it 50?
I think it was 55 a day.
Okay. So that's
that's
55,000.
But in your hypothetical, it would be 1,000 students, would be $50,000 there.
Okay.
Oh, it's 51.
So still not there, but.
Maybe I think.
Question, the Saturday school, that's voluntary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
voluntary.
they come if they want.
Right.
Actually, my thing would be like, why don't we try to do a campaign that the community gets conscious of having their kids attend the school, and, I mean, what can we do about it? I know that it's a big deal if the kids are not coming to school, and a lot of the times they're not really sick, or it just, we are not doing our job as a parents to bring the kids to school, maybe make more conscious of the parents that the school needs to have the students there, not only for as part of their education, but also because it's to keep going, and then they require so much. I mean, as a parent, and a lot of parents have so much power, right, in the community. So why don't we kind of try to make the work against them? They want all these rights, and be responsible and bring your kids to school.
Absolutely.
But there's rewards,
how can we do
right?
it?
Education and rewards.
Yeah.
How much money do we lose by kids not coming?
About $55 a day.
A day.
And how many kids don't come on average?
It's about 5% of our
ADA is
total
about
population.
5% below enrollment.
So that works
Which
out
I
in a
will say
year?
that as a district, we actually have a little bit on the range of comparing us to other districts in the county. We're on the better range. We're closer to 96%, as opposed to the standard across the state is about 95%, and there's a number of districts that will get down to about 93, and that's where there's some real stronger pushes coming in. So we're on, not to say we can't still try to find creative ways. Ultimately, there are 3 ways that you boost revenue for a district. You bring more students, which right now in your district is certainly helping us do. You increase their attendance, which we're talking about right now, but attendance because you're funded based on the number of students in the district who are actually attending. So those 2 things go hand in hand. And the third one is demographic factors. Again, Governor Brown has created a funding system in the past few years that gives additional funding to districts who are serving students of low economic means, as well as English learner populations. So the funding model significantly provides additional funding, about $1,400 of additional funding per student who submits and qualifies for free and reduced price lunch. So that's something that we certainly are looking at. How can we continue to get the information out, even if there are families that may not realize that they do qualify, because there's families that can very much live a middle-class lifestyle and are comfortable in their lifestyle and don't realize that based on the thresholds that are created for those applications, that they just by submitting an application, they could still have little Johnny bring his lunch to school each day, or he could still pay for his lunch if he really wanted to. But just by submitting that application, they could be directly responsible for an additional $1,400 to the district.
So that's how that funding is determined?
Right, those are the 3 factors. You're looking at, it really actually breaks down to just 2. The enrollment helps with ADA, but it's ADA, and then you're looking at the demographic factors.
Okay. So education and reward, really, out to the parents.
So absolutely. I know that when we did face a true fiscal crisis in 2008, we eliminated a lot of staff. We also, teachers, we also eliminated some of our district staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the things that we're talking about as potentially growing our revenue for the district involves a lot of organization at the district level. And I don't think we have enough, and that's just my layperson's observation, is that you really wouldn't have enough people to kind of implement some of the creative ideas that we're talking about, even getting more students to apply for the increase.
You're saying that cuts
So-
have been so severe at the administrative level that...
Well, yes, if we're actually talking about growing, then I think we need to grow our administrative staff or contract with the district. The district would have to weigh that expense also in exploring some of these additional ideas, because my sense is that we're operating on a very lean staff, and that there are some economies that we could probably realize through having a greater coordination that can only be done with more people.
But part of the capacity that can be built through a public-private partnership like David's talking about is that nonprofits and other organizations can develop the capacity to assist administration. An example would be the project I'm working on. The Forest Service does not have enough money, enough staff to do the NEPA assessments to get anything off the ground past level 1 on trails. So we are now building capacity under a grant program to bring in the NEPA professionals we could do, and so it reduces the staff time that the Forest Service has, so these things actually get done. So moving toward those professional level services and administration can be done through effective public-private partnerships. There's plenty of talent out there.
Along that line, I got the impression from your discussion this evening, David, that the nonprofits, at least Food for Thought and maybe some others that are at Miners Oaks right now, are actually paying the school district to use facilities.
I don't have
I
that
got the
sense.
impression there was some source of funds there.
They're
more of this stuff,
self-funded
there'd
programs.
be more money.
They're self-funded programs, so they provide additional education and enrichment that doesn't cost the district anything.
Food for Thought's been incredibly generous financially with both the donation of time as well as those trays that you saw, the lunch trays that are far better for the environment. We're actually able to put into those compost bins as opposed to
Hydration station.
Yeah, styrofoam. Those have been fully funded for, not just a portion of. They were what that organization is what brought in
time and materials.
But they're also not using our facilities for office space or anything like that. I mean, so I don't know if that was where the.
Thank you, I didn't understand that.
You did mention that you're trying to get a grant for this program, right?
At the moment, we're looking at a grant application to an EPA grant for a Teach the Teachers program that would be teaching teachers how to teach environmental education. So we're writing that now. Whether we'll get it or not, I don't know.
And then if you get it, it will be done over there in the Miners Oaks location.
That's a possibility, yes.
Are there any grants for infrastructure that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's the whole drops thing.
Okay, so that's drops. So is that another one that's being written? Or is that one that you're proposing?
The drops we already submitted, so we submitted a drops proposal which was not funded. But the beauty of it is that we have a proposal, and there may be a second drops. This is State Water Quality Control Board. There may be a second one come out, and they certainly, Regina's knowledge of what is happening is that they're interested in funding what we have in Ventura County, and there's a good chance of funding being available, but it's all through the expertise of Regina at the moment.
Excellent. And that's, I guess, another form of, couldn't really call it revenue, but it would be grants, correct? Finding grants and funding.
Yeah, it is. That's income, yeah.
Well, if you have facilities or program that is being funded outside of the school budget that draws in students, then that's a net gain.
Absolutely.
That can be quite significant.
Right, oh, absolutely.
So is one of your ideas sort of, Marianne, like maybe we would, not we per se, but you're thinking, what if we hired some sort of coordinator that would connect with people that are similar, with ideas that are similar to Dave, and kind of like, your idea with the Forest Service and the community service, you have schools that might sort of operate under these purviews, the environmental school, the service school, is that sort of where you're going with that? But you would need
be an
someone.
assignment that I would imagine, but if these things are growing out of the community, wanting them and putting them to the school board, and the school board is gonna have to figure out the best way to implement them, and I don't know if they can implement a lot of these ideas with the current staff that they have. I know some school districts contract with grant writing companies or grant writers in particular. That's another option.
I mean, those are still possibilities no matter what our decision is, right? Even if we decide, if we decide to recommend a school closure to the board, all these ideas can still be put in place with the remaining six schools.
But we're talking about repurposing a facility,
Exactly.
and that would be, I mean, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but if we're looking at expanding through an extra property or expanding our use of a current property, I think it just takes another step. So.
Anything else on this?
I'm interested in the difference between ADA and enrollment, because this is anecdotal, but we have a student at Miners Oaks whose parent said, my child didn't want to go to school. And so she didn't go to school until she found the garden program, and then she wants to go to school because there is joy in the garden program and she loves it. So when you have programs that kids love to come to, then they come to school, and then the school district benefits. So, I really see a lot of that being where you're teaching them outdoors, you're taking them out of the traditional classroom.
David, you are so good at circling back. I really did.
Hey, did I mention resilient schools?
Oh, can you tell us about them?
Yeah, I got a picture.
I got a PowerPoint you can show us?
Very good.
I mean, we did talk before about at each campus, what's special about that campus. So you got this at Miners Oaks. What's at each of these schools that can be grown upon that benefits the entire district and attracts students. One thing I just learned recently at the rec department, I didn't realize there are, I believe, 5 charter schools that come to the rec department for different nature programs or arts programs. Because it's available for their schools. I do believe kids will come, parents will bring kids to these schools if there's something exceptional about them going on.
One of those programs has been Tour Wild, which is my partner Heather King, who we run Once Upon a Watershed together, and the rec department currently sponsors that program, but we're looking at, she's actually writing the EPA grant. We're looking at the moment, Oak Grove being the fiscal sponsor. I meet with the principal of Oak Grove tomorrow. So, the Land Conservancy is looking at managing the Oak Grove saddle property, which is the place that has old growth oak woodland that we use for our educational programs. So there's a lot of partnerships that are providing this, support that it's non-quantifiable, but it's super enriching for the school district. And I think that providing support for these programs in whatever way, if that's surplus property that can be space that we can use,
I think the time and materials that people like Food for Thought donate to the school district is quantifiable.
It's incredible the programs that we provide for very low amounts of money, that we run programs that we don't get paid very much. Talk about
the
poorly
Poco
paid,
Farms.
Poorly paid teachers. What about the guys who do the non-profit work?
Right. The Poco Farms, the outdoor classrooms, are just so amazing, and I know that Nordoff goes over there, correct? As does Miners Oaks.
Greg's right here. They went out today, and he described the program as being magic. Magic.
That wasn't my words. That
it was Grace's. That was the farming.
Yeah.
His word was.
What was my word?
Yeah.
Incredible.
How about that?
Sure.
How about that? Within walking distance of Nordoff.
Absolutely. Do other schools utilize that site?
Yes.
Which school? Other OUSD schools?
Oh, OUSD schools? Well, Food for Thought does its farm visits for the 4th grade program, and we've been using Poco Farm. I think it's just 1 year that we've used it, Laurie, right? So
right, this will be our second year, and we have Miramonte already scheduled to go out in May, and Danon's class is scheduled to come out too. So all the 4th graders in the larger part of the valley will go there. We'll try to take the 4th graders from Summit and San Antonio to the Besant property up there.
Where is that farm?
It's on Stockbridge. The street address is 182 South Lomita, but you actually enter it through Stockbridge, which
It's
is
one block behind Andy's Liquor.
it's two.
And Walking Range.
How are you supposed to know where that is?
Not to say I know them. Walking Range, the donut shop, all those.
Yeah, okay.
That's Andy's reference point everywhere. Well, it's next to that liquor store.
It's about a mile away.
Stockbridge is the side street off of Movita. I didn't realize there was, I thought that was all residential.
Yeah, it looks residential.
Well,
It does.
like it was 3 acres. 4 acres, yeah.
Well-
It's a treasure.
Yeah, absolutely, and very good job there.
Young people really like to be part of that.
Absolutely, and we have students who went through Greg Lepine's environmental science class who are interning there, who are, you know, it's a tremendous resource, and Grace and Dan Malloy are super communitarians. I mean, Grace has charged up the Grange, which is another education facility.
That's right.
You know, I'm doing a community soil testing workshop there, April 23rd. Come along, it's free.
Great.
They do canning at the Grange now,
Yeah,
and all
yeah.
our great
All
things
that
there.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Excellent.
our last item for the agenda tonight, and it kind of setting us up a little bit for our next meeting, which is just in a week. Andy had a conversation with legal counsel for the school district, and he has some clarification on what our legal requirements as a 7-Eleven committee are in terms of our recommendation to the school board.
So we've talked before in passing out, and we should have some copies back there as well, but the establishment of the committee comes from the Ed Code. And so we've actually pulled what the 5 duties that we're ultimately responsible for if we come to a certain decision. So the top is just the actual Ed Code pulled directly. If everyone has that. Are there copies back there? If anyone wants one,
There's some extra copies up here.
Some extra.
And Andy, you said if we come to a certain decision, in fact, these 5 are relevant no matter what decision we come to, correct?
They're all things we have to consider in coming to a decision.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I would say though, the first, so if you look below the bold black line, the first option that we've always maintained, that this committee was not charged with, okay, figure out which school we're closing. That certainly was never the charge. It was a matter of looking at what is the best way to house the 1,325 or so students that we currently have, knowing that that number's not going to vary downward or upward significantly over the next decade. And so, as it's always been the case, we do have the ability to make the recommendation not to close any of the 5 elementary schools. And if that's the case, that was where I was hesitating, Glenn, is that ultimately, if that is where we're all falling out as a recommendation, then we don't have the same requirements to finalize the steps necessary for the identification of surplus property, because we're not identifying surplus property.
Or we make a determination, yeah, that there is no surplus.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that always remains an option. Now I want to talk about what the 2 other options really are, and what it is that we have the ability actually to separate out the recommendation, if we choose to make a recommendation toward a school closure, can be separate from what we're going to do with that vacated property or that then identified surplus property. And so I've written here that if the committee makes a recommendation to close a school site, it does not need to make the recommendation on what should happen with that surplus property at this time. What we could choose to do is notify the school district that our recommendation is to close X school or X and Y school. At that time, the board will be responsible for acting, and we would still follow through these steps that I'll go through, but the school or the board would be responsible for either accepting that recommendation and acting on it, or they could choose to deny that recommendation or choose not to implement that recommendation. And if that's the case, then we wouldn't need to, again, finalize the discussion around, do we believe that the property should be rented or leased versus sold, or what should we do with the actual surplus property, because there was no surplus property ultimately identified. So we have that ability to bifurcate the decision. The committee can provide the recommendation for school closure to the school board. The school board would then perform the necessary steps to vote to accept or decline the recommendation. And if the school board does accept the recommendation, then it would require the 7-Eleven committee to reconvene. At that time, we would still have to go through the process of our recommendation on that priority list for the use with that surplus property, the disposition of that property. okay?
Can you explain that in a little bit more detail?
If it's okay, I'm going to actually do that in 2 minutes.
Perfect.
So now let's talk about if the committee wants to make the full recommendation at once. If we say we don't want to risk having to reconvene in a year, or we just believe strongly that we have gained a consensus and we really want to have that full deliberation and recommendation going to the board, then we can identify, again, that X and or XY school we are recommending for closure, and then we have to also make a decision about what we believe we should be doing with that property. And so let's actually go into what I say here. If the committee makes a recommendation to close a school site, it may include its recommendation of school closure, the subsequent identification of that closed property as excess property or surplus property, and then the priority list of use for that newly designated surplus property. So if we go back up into A, B, C, D, and E as far as our requirements at the top of the page, we know we've already really, I think, done a thorough and a really excellent job of that first part, the first phrase on A, which is review the projected school enrollment and other data as provided by the district to determine the amount of surplus space. So we've looked at enrollment, we've looked at our facilities, we've looked at the financial, we've tried to actually take things away from just the financial. We've looked at the potential impact on the teaching staff and size of grades, the elimination or addition of combination classes, a number of different things that I think we all agree we've done a pretty good job in that portion. So the next thing is B, that we must establish a priority list of use of surplus property and real property that will be acceptable to the community. And so that's where, again, we could choose at this time to avoid going to that level, which would be that first or that second choice I gave us, as far as we could choose just to the school closure and then hold off on making this recommendation. But if we did want to make the full recommendation, then I've given an example of what that actually looks like, because I feel like that B can be really difficult to parse out and try to figure out. And so that's where our attorney gave us some guidance. An example of a recommendation that would fully meet the requirements of A and B from above is if we said something to the effect of, the committee recommends the closure of school X. The resulting vacant property would be surplus property to the district and should be leased or sold in that order at its highest and best use valuation. So that statement itself fully meets the requirements of that B, which again, by the wording of B, by just reading establish a priority list of use, can seem confusing, but what it really is saying that if we simply are prioritizing lease over sale or vice versa, as well as if we make that determination that we think that the district should make its best efforts to secure the highest value while also certainly maintaining all legal responsibilities it has to offer the site to the entities that may have a priority right to the site, that would again meet the requirements for the recommendation. So at that point, if we do come to the determination that we believe a school should be closed, we do come to a conclusion or a consensus that we favor lease over sale, one or the other, which again, simply saying that the property should be leased or sold in that order, saying, board, we're recommending lease if possible, but selling is also okay by us. We have that sort of flexibility, or we could simply say, lease, but we don't recommend a sale. Then it becomes the responsibility that we actually publicize this decision. So we need to, before we can come to our final deliberation, we have to do what's identified in C, which is have public notice given to the community and then an opportunity for a hearing. So that hearing, even though we welcome public comments every meeting, and we, really, I'm grateful, and I think this whole committee is for, the public that's shown up tonight and has voiced, their views about their school. We will have a separate meeting that will actually be fully devoted to a public hearing that will be directly in response to once we've come to a recommendation. And again, that meeting actually is going to have to be held after we make the recommendation for a school closure, regardless of if we actually choose to also make the recommendation on sale versus lease.
So
We're
question.
Yeah.
We, as a committee, the 7-Eleven committee has a public hearing, or
Correct. We do.
Okay.
We do. So once we've made, and that was what Glenn actually also referenced earlier, is that if we do come to a consensus, even if it's a 6-5 vote, if we come to a point where we feel like we're making a recommendation, before that recommendation can officially go to the board, we do have to have a public hearing for that. And he was saying that we would likely skip a week of meeting and we'd allow there to be a 2-week period so that way sufficient notice can be given. We'd make sure that we post at all school sites. We'd really work closely with our local media to try to make sure it was in the press, as well as we would be, doing everything else we can to reach out to the community and inform them of this public hearing opportunity to directly respond again to a recommendation that we had been forming. The recommendation at that point is not final. It's only after the public hearing has taken place that we can come to a final conclusion. So it's a tentative recommendation until that public hearing occurs.
Is that meeting to finalize the recommendation at a closed session? Or a public hearing?
No, it's all in a public meeting.
Always public.
Right. So we have the ability, we could come to a recommendation, we would have that public hearing, we could have at the end of that public hearing, we could on that same day come to a vote if we still believe that, either despite what we've heard that we are going to move forward with our recommendation, or due to what we've heard we no longer want to make that recommendation, we could vote down, obviously, or we could make alterations. We could make changes.
So if we came to another decision, would we have another public hearing on our decision that we changed?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. I actually don't know.
That's an endless loop.
That seems excessive. I know.
I'll talk to our attorney and I'll email it out tomorrow because I don't know that answer. If we're holding a public hearing, we do significantly alter the recommendation, do we need to have a new public hearing? I'll reach out to our attorney, I'll get that answer tomorrow. Or hopefully tomorrow. So again, the important thing that I just want to make sure that we did know is some of the protocol. Again, if we choose that our recommendation is not to close a school site, then some of these points are obviously moot. But if we are going to move forward with a recommendation that was going to result in a school closure, there are certain things that we have to make sure we do, including that public hearing. We could, again, choose to have, at the end of that public hearing, the ultimate vote that would make the recommendation official. We've talked about, Mary Ann recommended, I think everyone around the table agreed strongly that we would welcome either dissenting opinions or concurring opinions, and we could have, a well-rounded recommendation that's going to try to really capture the sentiment of this committee that would ultimately then be presented to the board. So that's the process as far as being able to eventually move toward a recommendation that will be going to the board.
Any questions? Everyone clear on that process?
So we continue to have public comment throughout?
Absolutely. Public comment is a part of each of our meetings. The public hearing is in addition to.
Excellent.
After announcing your initial recommendation.
The public comments, again, welcome to every meeting, but right now it's a general comment and trying to help inform our opinion. The public hearing is going to be once we've really, again, gathered around a recommendation, so they're going to be actually able to comment directly to that specific
response
recommendation.
to a preliminary recommendation.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that. So with that, I'd like to suggest a bit of a format for next Thursday's meeting, and that is do your homework and come prepared to make your view known. And there's 11 of us. If we do 5 minutes each, that'll take us roughly an hour between everyone speaking and transitions. I'd like to hear each member of the committee first and go through each member of the committee's recommendations, and perhaps I'll use the board and we'll draw some different, I don't know how many different recommendations we're going to have up there. And then at the end of the hour, we'll then get in more in-depth and just have open discussion about whatever's up on that board and see where we go from there, basically.
All right.
So if you could come next week prepared for that. And I think what I'll do is I will, I don't want to put anybody on the spot necessarily, so if you show up at the meeting next week and you have a strong desire to be the first speaker and to present your idea first, let me know. At the meeting. Otherwise, I may just draw names out of a hat or something, so that everyone has a fair shot at either being first or last. Okay?
And I would just like to again state, I'd like that to be a very vigorous discussion. I would really like us to poke and examine all of our opinions from all angles, play the devil's advocate, really vet these ideas quite thoroughly.
Agreed.
All right.
Okay. Anything else?
Do we end early?
It's our first meeting. First meeting we've ever ended early.